Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this very short brief introduction to ISO 19130 Part 3 standard. I'm Yuqi Bai, part of the development team. Li Pingdi, Emil Davis, Doug O'Brien, Wolfgang Chris, and some more members from China side, Meng Jin, Jiankun Guo, and Yuan Zhengshou are major contributors to the development of the standard. Why we need to develop this standard? Basically, we all know for each pixel of a remote sensing imagery, it corresponds to a specific geographic location on the ground. Showing on this side, as you could see, we have a latitude and longitude for the up right corner pixel, as well as for the lower left corner of the pixel. And the remote sensing imagery, the sensor models are the key to get the geographical information of each pixel. And these sensor models are well defined in Part 1 and Part 2 of 19130 standard. However, this geopositioning process still lacks a corresponding description. I mean, an implementation schema for sensor models defined in Part 1 and Part 2 are highly expected. As shown in this slide, these are models defined in Part 1 and Part 2, but they are defined as UML diagrams, and so far no XML or similar implement schemas available for users to use. Besides these Part 1 and Part 2 ISO standards, there are closely related OGC sensor web enablement standards. They do provide some way, to some extent, to describe the sensor model and to describe the geopositioning process, but they have different perspectives and different way of organizing their models. So therefore, we have to introduce alignment between them when developing the standards, where OGC elements are utilized as much as possible, and all the elements defined in Part 1 and Part 2 of the standards have been covered. Specialists from China, Canada, France, Germany, and the United States, we're working together. Over the 2.5 years, we refer 18 ISO and OGC standards, and we did pay a lot of work, reading over 2,050 pages of standard documents, and finally cover this exact encoding specification for sensor models defined in Part 1 and Part 2. For each element, we introduce the exact encoding rules, specifications, where OGC standards are utilized as much as possible. Besides that, we also provided some exemplars where readers of the standard could easily understand how the sensor models are defined and how they could reuse the models defined in the standard to define their specific geoposition process. In terms of the value of the standards from the ISO, from the OGC, and also from the remote sensing field, I would say, first of all, it does solve our difficulties faced by ISO 19130 serial standards. For many long time, we don't have an implementation schema. And right now, the sensor mode defined in Part 1 and Part 2 could be directly applied. Second, for remote sensing data users, right now, they could understand the positioning process, the details about the process, and therefore, this standard could promote the credibility or trustworthiness of the remote sensing data production process. For the remote sensing data producers, I would say the positioning process function in the data ground systems now could support different types of remote sensing image data processing in a more modular and a standardized way. And last but not least, it does provide a working method where we could see existing standards could be deeply compatible, while we could still introduce some new standards that meet our ISO needs in ISO. That's pretty much what we would like to share with you, the background information, the scenes working behind the scenes to enable the development of the standards. We hope you could be of interest in this story. And if you have any further questions or comments, please do not hesitate to let us know. Thank you, and see you later.